Hey, it's Tom here for Signal Sounds, and today I'm building 3 patches with the latest Eurorack modules from Nekyia Circuits. I've got Occult, which is a powerful analog oscillator, Ouija, which is a kind of oscillator sidekick utility, and Wand, which is a Buchla-style crossfading voltage processor. Now, DivKid has already made a great video that goes into a lot of depth on all of these modules, so I'm going to link to that below rather than spending a lot of time on a detailed overview of my own. I'm just going to get right into some patches and explain the key features as I go along. So let's go! So for this first patch, I want to use some of the different outputs of Occult. I'm going to run them through the Sasumi low-pass gate from Nekyia Circuits and this VCA from MRG. So I'm going to take 4 different outputs, 2 through low-pass gates, 2 through VCAs. I'm going to take 4 trigger patterns from the Zularic repetitor from Noise Engineering just off screen. They're going to trigger envelopes in Fuji, which are then going to open those low-pass gates and VCAs. And let's just go through the parts one at a time. First of all, this is the SAW output, which is the yellow trace on the scope going through the low-pass gate. So just a classic kind of analog SAW with a little bit of filtering from the LPG. I've got a fairly snappy envelope. Very short attack and short release. We're getting that nice kind of Vactrol plucky effect through the LPG. One thing that's quite interesting on Occult is the PWM control, which would obviously control the pulse width of the pulse output, also has an effect on the SAW wave. If I move it to 12 o'clock, you see that trace, it kind of moves the 2 halves of the SAW apart, so we get this octave doubling effect in the middle. So let's add a bit of modulation to that. I've got the Nekyia Obsidian dual LFO down here. I'm going to take the logical max output from these 2 unsynced triangle LFOs and just go into the PWM. Just so we're going to get this kind of octave shifting effect going on. Next up, blue trace. I'm taking the square output and I'm actually running it through the Ouija utility here. This is a 4HP utility which has a few things like voltage controlled slew, a noise source, ring mod, difference rectifier, and it has a sub-octave generator. So I'm feeding in a square in getting a square an octave below coming out, which is the blue trace here. There is also a sub-octave generator built into Occult, but I'm going to use the Ouija one just to show you what that can do as well. So again, that's running through the other channel of the LPG with a snappy envelope. And it's just a classic kind of low square wave. Next voice, or next output of Occult is, let's listen to the pulsar. That's the green trace. And this is a special wave shaping circuit based on an old Ian Fretch design that takes a sine wave or a triangle wave. You can flip it with this switch. I'm going to stick to the sine. And it applies 2 pulses to this, which would result in a bit of wave folding and kind of wave shaping. By playing with the harmonics, you can change that shape. So let's get some LFO going to that harmonics control. So this is going through a normal VCA, again with an envelope from Fuji controlling it, so it's a bit snappier than the LPG. And finally, the shaper output. This crossfades between a sine wave, this is the red trace, a kind of saturated sine, and that pulsar output. So we're getting what's happening to the pulsar when it's over there, and we're just getting a pure sine when it's on this side. You can patch in something to replace that sine wave if you like. This is just using the internal sine by default, which I'll just stick with. And let's modulate that crossfade, the shape control, using the other LFO from Obsidian. So I'm going to go into there. Now I've panned that slightly left and the pulsar output slightly right. So if I bring the pulsar back in, add a bit of reverb. And let's bring in the SAW as well. And bring in the sub-octave. And we can play with the pattern in Zularic slightly. Yeah, let's stick with that for now. Let's take a slow pitch sequence to the volt per octave input. So with these 4 different outputs from the oscillator, 4 different trigger patterns, and taking those 4 outputs through 4 different VCAs and LPGs, you get quite a nice complex kind of part. Let's just bring in some drums as well. I'm just going to play with the trigger pattern again. Quite like these sparser ones. We can maybe open up some of these envelopes a bit. So there's just a single oscillator with a single very slow pitch sequence going into it. So next I'm going to build a little techno jam with Occult using some through zero FM on the sine wave output. Through zero FM is a kind of slightly more musical and controllable version of frequency modulation, which produces pretty nice results. So let's get a little sequence going from the variegate. I'm running the pitch sequence through Ouija, through the slew limiter at the top, which I can use to apply a bit of portamento. Hear these kind of slides between notes. Let's just bring it down to something that's quite subtle. I'm running that into the buffered mult in Mezcal from Nekyia down here, and then to the volt per octave of Occult. We're just listening to the sine, which is the yellow trace. That's running into the Susumi low pass gate. And I've got a very short, plucky envelope from Fuji, again, opening that up. So far, so simple. Let's bring in some FM then. So I've got root locus, the filter from Nekyia. I've feedback patched it so it's self-oscillating. That's the blue trace. And we're just getting this kind of saturated sine wave. And if I patch that to the through zero FM input, bring that in, this frequency is just static at the moment. It's not changing, so we're getting this kind of constant. Sounds quite cool, but let's take a buffered copy of the pitch sequence and go into the volt per octave. And now we're tracking the same sequence, so we got a consistent tone across these notes. We can dial in with the frequency control on root locus to adjust the relationship for something that sounds good. That sounds quite cool. And yeah, this sort of short plucky envelope in LPG gives us this very kind of classic West Coast bootlery sort of sound. And just bring in some other drums and play around. Some drums from the Digitact. Now, one other thing I've got going on is I'm running the sine out of Occult through the scope and then into the Wand crossfader, and I'm taking the noise output, the white noise from Ouija, into the other side of the crossfader in Wand. And if I kind of pan this over, that's the noise through the LPG. If I bring that down to around about the middle, I've got some stepped random from PAMs coming in to control the crossfader. So if I bring up the decay time a bit, take the drums out, you can hear this noise kind of randomly coming in and producing this little percussive effect, which is quite nice to kind of add an extra layer of percussiveness, along with the hi-hats from the Digitact. Okay, finally for today, I'm just going to build a massive drone patch using lots of outputs and lots of modulation just to kind of get a really rich and complex evolving sound from the single oscillator. Let's have a quick listen. We've got the pulsar output going into the root locus filter, just droning here, and I'm using LFOs from Obsidian down here to control the symmetry and harmonics. I've also got another logical max controlling the filter cutoff. Let's just bring a bit of resonance. And on the second input of the filter, which I can pan across to using the crossfader, I've got a sub square wave Again, generated using Ouija, as in the first patch. And I can pan across to that. So let's have a little blend of that low octave square. And bring in a big reverb. Now I'm using one of the square outputs from Obsidian through the comparator and Mezcal to produce a couple of alternating gates, one of which is going to trigger an envelope, which is going to open Sasumi, which is going to be taking the shaper output from Occult. So I'm going to fade that up as well. We're going to get these additional kind of... Just turn down the original sound. So this is the shaper through Sasumi. And I've got the sine and square going through the wand crossfader into the other side of the shaper. So one side of the shaper is a mixture of sine and square controlled by this crossfader. The other side of the shaper is the pulsar output, if you're following along. The point is, with an LFO controlling that crossfade as well, we're getting quite a rich, harmonically changing sound there coming in occasionally via this slow envelope and the LPG, which layers on nicely. And the other envelope that I'm triggering using the other half of the comparator, I'm going to patch into the exponential FM just to give us these little sort of laser hits. I'm cross-modulating the two LFOs in Obsidian here so I can get some nice extreme frequency effects like that. So with that giant reverb. So hopefully you got a little flavour just how powerful Occult is as an analog oscillator with all these outputs. Pairs really well with the rest of the Nekyia modules, obviously. So yeah, available from Signal Sounds now, links below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.